Okay, it's time now that we go through the many questions that everyone submitted over the interval. I think we have far too many to get through in the short time that we have. I think that as people leave and think about it, more and more questions will arise, which I see someone here says the book and the companion volume are urgently need to be translated into as many languages as possible: Arabic, Turkish, Mandarin, etc. Will this happen, inshallah?
Yes, the book has been translated into Arabic, Turkish, Malay, Spanish, Italian, and they are all published, and it's at the moment being published in German. It's been translated into German.
And then a companion volume coming out soon.
In what?
A new volume, inshallah.
We are going to work over the next 3 years on another book, which will be the continuation of this Mizan thesis, with the idea of dealing with the whole question of Islam in history. Because this guy is a wonderful historian. He's a historian. And with that, I think I can write another book, inshallah.
So we have a number of questions here. I think one of the most pertinent for us is someone asks, what are some key issues we Muslims are facing within our communities which are causing these crises to become major anxieties? So we have key issues within our communities, our Muslim communities, that are causing these crises to become major anxieties. How do we combat this?
I think that we've actually moved very recently into a period when the age of crisis has actually become something that everyone is aware of. And I would suggest that the concerns of the Muslim community are not very much different from the concerns of everyone. I think that there is a tremendous feeling at the moment of a kind of invasion of childhood, an invasion of the family. There is with the Muslims, it's very poignant, because what is important about the Muslim community is that the Muslim community is still much more intact in terms of its moral structures. And this is of enormous importance. The decay of the way in which modernity, which when I was young, when I was a child, morality and ethics were the domain of Christianity. Modernity had nothing to do with it. It had no philosophy. It was the domain of Christianity. More than half the country on a Sunday went to church. And ethics was the domain of a civilized education, because people were educated at Cambridge and Oxford and the other universities. The classics were still king in education. So what we have experienced is the actual manifestation of modernity going from taking control of the physical, making things for us, to actually taking control of the whole perspective of how we view the world and of how we behave. Now, what was interesting for me, because I lived through the 60s, and post-modernity, which is now ruling and being exported from here, from America, post-modernity was being formed. All the characters, the Sartre, Foucault, all these characters who came up with these terrifying ideas which completely disintegrate society. That was when they were having them. In the name of freedom, in the name of the total freedom of the individual, so the individual could do exactly as he pleased. And this loss of a meta-narrative and a meta-morality which bound the society means that this process of disintegration that is now happening rapidly, we are all aware of. But for Muslims, it's something that we can very easily see. It's not difficult for the Muslims to understand, because the Muslims are like the Christians were back in the 50s. This is the moment when the fact that they're behind in their engagement with modernity is a tremendous advantage, because they can see this moment when everything is splitting asunder. When that atom bomb was detonated, it shattered. And that shattering has been going through the whole soul, the whole culture, the whole morality, the whole aesthetic, the whole environment, losing its scale, losing its measure, losing its justice, completely losing its mizan. So these problems which the Muslim community face are problems which, in a way, I would like to suggest are much less of a problem for the Muslim community than it is for the general community, which is governed and accepts the new laws, the new ideas which are percolating through society and are being put into law week by week by week and degenerating the human being. So I think that the problem, of course, the Muslims have had in this country. I always go back, as you know, Yusuf, to the heroes of our Muslim community, the grandparents who came into this country in the 1950s under such, first invited here to rebuild a ruined country, but who suffered such difficulties, such problems, and who strove, who came from simple backgrounds, but built mosques, built halal butchers, looked after their families, educated their families, and they're now coming to Cambridge. I see them. It's a magnificent generation. And these young people who have still got their moral fibers intact, is a beautiful thing to see these young people coming to Cambridge. And they're coming into all the different universities. And without their grandparents, they would not be here. So the Muslim community has enormous strength. It has wonderful teachers. It has wonderful sheikhs. All we're trying to do with this Mizan thesis is to change the perspective where we are still trapped. We are still innovated. We're still in a phase where we're drained in terms of the perspective. And confusion weakens us. So it is so important to be able to become clear. Is that in any way answering that question?
I think it does more than just answer the question. I think, though, I'll turn to something else now, a question which I think you might enjoy. How can the arts and culture, theatre, art, music, etc., in the UK be part of finding Mizan, particularly at a time when many Muslims are cultural consumers?
Gosh, that's such a difficult question. You know, when we've heard this afternoon and this morning, we've heard how that glorious Mizan is placed within all of us. We are born with it, the fitra, the great belief of the Muslim, that we are born pure. And we know this with our children. When a child is born, it is perfect. It has just come from the presence of Almighty Allah. It is so full of barakah. And for the first 7 years, it lives more with Almighty Allah than it does with us. That's why it's always protected. That's why the whole feminine world was there to protect and nourish that 7 years and to allow freedom. Freedom of imagination, freedom for the imagination of the child to grow naturally and beautifully and within its own world. Because when the little children play, they play games which we adults can't even begin to comprehend. They have imaginations which are immediate. They have spirits, and they have this sense, their sense, and they see things. They can transform a piece of wood into a glorious sword. They can become a pirate, or they can become a prince. And their games are incredible. Their games go from, they're epic, they go from drama in the sense of laughter and terror and crying, terrible crying. And then laughter. They can move from laughter to crying within a few seconds. And the little ones follow the older ones, and the older ones lead them, and then the little ones become the older ones, and they pass through a whole experience, a whole world of play. Because traditionally, in our tradition, up until the age of 7, you did not educate the children. You let them play, and you protected them so that they played in their world, and their own little imaginations could develop. And by the age of 7, they then moved into an extraordinary thing. They moved into the age of discernment. They stepped out of the garden. They were no longer unitive beings experiencing everything immediately. They started being able to see both sides, and that's when traditionally you educated them. And by that time, you then had them and you started educating them. And then, when they came to the next transition, the transition when they go to the age of 12, 13, 14, that was the age in which they became your friend. That was the age when the child makes the connection with the adult and becomes apprenticed to the adult. The child, the man, they want to become adults. Their heroes are adults. So they pass through that traumatic period of what we call adolescence. They pass through it beautifully, growing into maturity. Modernity has destroyed that process. And in the process, it's destroyed the way we can be creative. Because it's invaded childhood. Now, what children are exposed to is an adult idea of what childhood is. Plastic toys, plastic games, all these little stupid things that they do, you know, and little machines that go, aren't we only little children? Mamma mia, it's a shame. Because the child, when they see one of those plastic toys which are complete, nothing left for the imagination. It's like giving them a shot of heroin. They play with it. And then they lose interest. You have to give them another plastic toy, and then another, and another movie, and another this. And they're sat down in front of these things until what takes place is what I call the dialysis of the imagination. The child is now dependent upon an external stimulus, an external imagination to make it active. And the minute that external imagination is not there, it dies. It becomes bored. So they have to have this external thing, and now these, where are they? These things, endlessly. My grandchildren, one of whom is present with us, who's the most beautiful boy, lovely, lovely boy, but I have to tear him away from this thing. And this is eating into and destroying the children. So when we talk about the arts, we have to return to arts which come out of and have a form. If you want to create beauty, you have to have a form. You have to learn a craft. It's harsh, but this is the reality of it. This is the greatest crisis. To me, when people ask me, what can we do? My answer to that is what is it? Sorry, I do get old sometimes. Reclaim childhood. That is the most important thing to do. And no art will continue to become more and more incoherent, more and more crazy, more and more full of angst, more and more destroyed, more and more mirroring what is going on in the world as things disintegrate. But for the Muslims, we have glorious arts which can be revived. And we still have masters. So we have to look at that very carefully. We have to look at all this question with great care, because anything that can help and protect the children is going to be a blessing. And for me, the greatest shame that we face is the shame of allowing the childhood to be invaded and taken over by this modern cult. And that hasn't answered your question.
No. If we move on to another question that I see a few people have been asking about our presentation of Islam, is this some sort of romantic presentation that everything was perfect and it's utopic?
It was very interesting, yeah. No, this is very important. This is really important. One of the things which the myth of progress has done is to destroy the idea of perfection. Everything's evolving. Everything's changing. Nothing can stay, can be seen as perfect. And this is a terrible thing, because everything on some level actually manifests perfection. It's one of the most glorious things. When people ask me to explain Mizan, I often use the idea of the football match, the football. Because football used to be a game called mob football, and it would be played between villages. The whole villages would play against each other. And in the public schools, the sixth forms would used to play against the rest of the school, and it was chaos. And you just had to get the ball from one end of the pitch to the other. It didn't matter how you did it, and people got killed during these games. And then in the public schools, they drew out of that mob two games, football and rugby. One game in which you could carry the ball, and the other game in which you could kick the ball. And very rapidly, the rules and the possibilities emerged. They found that the scale of the game 11 players on each side, worked beautifully, in a pitch which had to be a certain size. If it was a bit bigger, it would be too big. If it was smaller, it would be crowded. The scale of Mizan. Then you had the footballers. If you look at them, they represent the most amazing physical Mizan imaginable. Their balance is unbelievable. They're like dancers. They can swerve and they can, they have complete control over their bodies. And then you have the goalpost and the penalty taker. He's standing there looking at that goal post, that goal, seeing it as very, very small. Whereas the goalie is standing there thinking it's too big. But exactly the right size to allow for just the advantage on the side of the kicker. Perfect scale. And then you've got the referee, justice. Because it has to go by rules. If you break the rules, it turns into chaos. And finally, you've got the manager, like Almighty Allah, watching from the side, seeing the whole thing, seeing where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are, and managing it. If you take the game of chess, it reached a perfection. You could go on playing chess forever, just as like you could go on playing that game of football forever. You can play good football and you can play bad football. But let us now apply this concept of being able to produce a perfect form for what it's there for, and apply it to Dar al-Islam. Apply it to that incredible world that was created from West Africa to China, that lasted for more than 1,000 years, that engaged all the different races, languages, geographical areas, cultures, and it existed so that when Ibn Battuta traveled from Morocco through to China, everywhere he went he could speak with the scholars in Arabic. Everywhere he went it was a familiar land, but it was also special because of the different cultures, but it was completely familiar. It was his way of life, in terms of his food and his praying and everything. My, how was this world framed? How was it constructed? How did it manage to survive? The secret is, we can understand this if we accept that the actual form, like the form of football or the chess game, was perfect. And it could play, humanity could play within it forever. Humanity, from the highest saint to the biggest rogue, every type of humanity could live there. And it could manage perfectly this extraordinary human being, created by Almighty Allah, given this freedom to accept or not, and given this freedom to reject and to create havoc. And there were good rulers, and there were bad rulers. There were honest judges, great judges, and there were criminal judges. And there were great merchants, and there were greedy merchants, and the people could always see who was who. The framework allowed them so that they could see who was a bad judge or who was a bad ruler, and their reputation would live with them. And then there would be the return of a good ruler, or the return and the general maintenance of good judges. So this is how we have to understand our historical academia. Academia is based on the business of always trying to find the downside, looking at the fault Try to see why. To try to understand something which is completely incomprehensible to them. So Islam, Darul Islam, this creation of the great revelation, the final revelation, the revelation in which Almighty Allah produced this perfection. Over 23 years it took for the revelation to be manifested, to be given to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and a complete community of human beings. Simple people who put seeds in the earth, some of the most high intellectuals that have ever existed, great merchants and leaders in battle. The companions contained all of these types, and that is why the extraordinary thing about Islam is that Islam appeals to every kind of human being. I have watched over my 50 years as being a Muslim how I came in through the arts. People have come in through every different door imaginable when it comes to Islam, because it was perfectly manifested. It is the unity, and it is complete, it is total. And that was why it was so successful, so rapidly, and was able to engage all of humanity. It is the only universal world. Every other world in existence before that was partial. Only Islam manifested that universality. So this is where this question is very important, because we complicate form and content. The form and the structure of that world and the content of the people who lived in it. And look, my first engagement with it was through the arts. And I saw from West Africa right through to China such a beauty and unity and perfection in the arts, architecture, and the environment, as we saw from that glorious series of photographs of places which, some of them right up until now, are still existing. Many of them, which just gives a glimpse. So when we talk about this question of form and content, if we are going to approach or begin to understand that unfolding, we have to, first of all, approach it with the recognition that Almighty Allah produced a perfect form, the Sharia, a perfection of a form within which the whole of life could take place. And the wonderful thing about Islam is that the religion is completely intact. We have the most wonderful teachers. We have the tremendous connection to that first glorious 23 years of revelation. And this is imprinted upon the Muslim heart. We know about the Holy Prophet and his life and his companions. We know so much about this, and it fulfills us. But when, after that, we are very ignorant when it comes to what then happened over that 1,000 years, because we are looking at it from a Western historical perspective. That is the principal work of this whole Mizan thesis. It's to change the paradigm of looking at the world from the perspective of progress to that of Mizan. I did try and answer that.
Not at all, you did indeed. So you would say then it's not necessarily a call to what some people might say, are we asking to turn back the clock?
Oh,
go back to the past?
No, this is another very important question. People say, of course, look, we are living in an incredible time for Muslims. We have to remember this is Allah's show. It's not our show. He's the director. He is the producer, the creator, the fashioner. We are the actors. We're given our parts. We're not in charge of the production. And when what is happening now is very clear. Dar al-Islam was destroyed, along with the environment, along with everything, every other culture. We're living in an age where you have to listen to the radio for 5 minutes in the morning, a new crisis. In this country, nature is being obliterated. So the world, all of that is being destroyed. So for the Muslims to be romantic about the idea, let's try and recreate Dar al-Islam, Mamma mia, what a kind of an idea. Because we are living in a time when it's clear the crisis is gathering. There is a huge chaos mounting around us. We're living in the age of crises. And for the Muslim, there's no difference. Because for the Muslim, this is simply the time when we are witnessing as we have always witnessed, as Islam has always been the witness. But it's also the refuge. So I like to liken it to the beautiful, looking back at Mecca, when the Blessed Prophet ﷺ was surrounded by chaos, and Islam was complete and perfect, and was in his house, or the house of his companions. And now it's very similar in the sense that the Muslims are not in control of this world. They're not governing it. But the Muslims are everywhere. And every house is a center, wherever they are praying. And as we all know, the most important thing, the central part of the Muslim way of life is the prayer. So this is a beautiful time for the Muslims. It's a time when we are able, why should we worry? This is his plan, not ours. For us, we have our teachers, we have our sheikhs, we have everything. And we can practice our religion beautifully, and we can create a refuge for all of those who are terrified by what is going on. And we can be the witness to al-haq, to the truth, in a time when untruth is holding sway more and more in all different areas. So the Muslim is very realistic. We have to be very, very realistic and practical. We're not romantics. Why go back? What do you mean go back? We're here, at present. This is why. The Muslim, it's being in the present. Now, that is the beauty of Islam.